This vintage Heuer Autavia Viceroy was sent in by a viewer who has owned it since its purchase in 1978. This watch does have a service history. It's seen 3 services in its lifetime, most recently at a local shop. However, upon return from that shop, the watch would no longer run consistently. The chronograph stops the watch within a minute or so, but even with the chronograph disabled, the power reserve of the watch isn't acceptable. Such symptoms could have any number of root causes, so I'll give this the full treatment and see if I can't get this watch running like new again. The 1163V reference, which uses the caliber 12 automatic chronograph movement, was a cross-promotional product between Heuer and the cigarette brand Viceroy starting in the early 70s. The Brown & Williamson Tobacco Company, looking to compete with Marlboro cigarettes, reached an agreement with Jack Heuer to offer a limited-time promotion to customers who purchased a carton of Viceroy cigarettes. The collaboration was mutually beneficial in that Brown & Williamson was able to utilize Heuer's existing association with auto racing to finally compete with the masculine Western-inspired Marlboro Man, and Heuer's Autavia was featured in major national publications it wouldn't otherwise have access to with its limited marketing budget. Customers looking to redeem the offer could buy a special Viceroy edition of the Autavia for only $88, a $200 value. As for this specific example, it appears to be all original, except Rick did mention he had replaced the crystal at some point. The hands are carefully pulled off using a plastic sheet to protect the dial. I like to use the Presto puller for this, but I did have to resort to the hand levers for the minute recorder hand. 2 foot screws secure the dial onto the main plate of the movement. The dial spacer is lifted away, and its purpose is to provide a small gap between the dial and the date ring. The date indicator guard is removed. Mounted underneath is the spring for the date jumper. The date indicator is just lifted away using ceramic tweezers to reduce the chance of scratching it. The hour wheel guard is slid out from under the hour wheel, and then the hour wheel can be lifted off the cannon pinion. The cannon pinion is simply slid off the center pipe of the plate. This is the date jumper, which was sprung against the indices of the date indicator using the spring on the underside of the guard plate. The date drive wheel is removed. The keyless work is left alone for now. Note the plate covering the intermediate gears is also used for the lower pivot of the second wheel and shouldn't be messed with until power is let down. The 8510 chronograph module can be removed in its entirety from the rest of the movement using these 3 blued screws. I'll put this aside for now, but I need to be careful so that the extended pivots of the minute recorder, chronograph runner, and hour recorder are not damaged. The micro rotor seen here is what drives the automatic winding work. The compact design allowed the movement to remain thin. The rotor can effectively activate the winding mechanism in both directions. The balance, featuring a nice micro adjustment regulation system, is removed to be set aside in a safe location. The caliber 12 uses a glucidated balance wheel, which is an alloy made of beryllium, copper, and iron, making it more stable over a range of temperatures and more resilient to damage than the cheaper brass variety. The bridge with the oscillating weight and its axle are now uninstalled. The stem is temporarily reinserted, and I'll go ahead and lift off the chronograph driving pinion before it falls off and rolls away as they like to do. I'm now removing the ratchet wheel from the top of the mainspring barrel. The click spring is carefully removed and set aside. The setting wheel spring is also removed. The red polystyrene stick helps keep the spring planted so it doesn't fly into orbit when I'm convincing it from its slot. This is a great time to inspect the plate where the barrel arbor rotates for signs of wear. Certain movements may exhibit more susceptibility to wear in these specific areas. Over time, the hole may expand, leading to an oval shape, and this can have a notable impact on power delivery. The automatic bridge is lifted away, revealing the wheel train for the automatic work. The ratchet wheel drive gear, coupling wheel, reduction gear, and winding up wheel are removed for cleaning. The lower automatic bridge, with its massive jeweled sliding surface in the center, is uninstalled. The stop click is carefully removed. It looks quite delicate. The wigwag pinion is removed, revealing the large jewel on the main plate it slides against. When securing the pinion between this and the other jewel, I affectionately call it the wigwag sandwich. I am now removing the intermediate ratchet wheel, followed by the intermediate crown wheel, and then the crown wheel. There's a core that's stuck within the crown wheel that apparently wasn't separated for cleaning in the last service. The barrel bridge and mainspring barrel are lifted away. Again, I'm inspecting the barrel for any excessive movement of the arbor, which doesn't appear to be an issue here. As I prepare to begin removing the train of wheels, I notice the drive wheel mounted on top of the fourth wheel extended pivot is slightly deformed. Notice how various sections of the wheel catch the light a little bit differently. These wheels are tricky to remove, and what I assume happened here is a past service person caused this by unevenly prying the wheel off with a set of levers. I prefer to use a presto puller for this reason, and in fact the wheel was designed to be pulled from the top rather than pried from underneath. Notice the lip that's turned into the center right here. The presto puller jaws can latch right onto this lip, and the pulling motion removes the wheel vertically off the pivot. This may have been contributing to the wavy time grapher traces. It could also cause the watch to stop, depending on how the depthing was affected by the deformation. The train wheel bridge can now be uninstalled. Notice how the second wheel's lower pivot sits in the removable bridge on the dial side of the plate. Bad news. The extended fourth wheel pivot is slightly bent. This damage was likely sustained at the same time the drive wheel was butchered when it was pried off. The second wheel arbor has the cannon pinion mounted to it. This must be removed for cleaning and then lubricated later on. This is one nice aspect of the design. In contrast with a typical watch movement, this means the entire train can undergo maintenance without needing to disassemble the dial side. It seems the winding pinion had jammed against the train bridge at some point and began to wear through the brass. It's anybody's guess how or when this could have happened. The pallet bridge is now uninstalled, and the pallet fork is lifted away. The set screw is fully loosened so that it and the stem can be finally removed for cleaning. The winding pinion and sliding clutch are also removed. Back to the dial side, the setting lever spring is uninstalled, revealing the yoke and yoke spring, which are removed next. The minute work cock is uninstalled, which, as mentioned earlier, also has the bushing for the second wheel pivot. The cannon pinion protrudes through here and drives the motion work. This is another area that seemed neglected from the last service, yet for whatever reason still looks like it's seen some action. The minute wheel is lifted off its post, followed by the two intermediate setting wheels. The 8510 chronograph module was designed to be cleaned simply by dunking it in an ultrasonic bath. Under normal circumstances, it's not necessary to disassemble it for a typical service. The lubrication points are accessible with minimally invasive procedures. That being said, I've considered several factors which make this an atypical situation. This includes the quality of the previous service, the overall age of the movement, and the fact that the movement was malfunctioning. It's for these reasons I've decided to fully service this module, hoping to identify any other contributing issues. In doing so, I will hopefully save the next service person the hassle of needing to do so. I begin with removing the hammer cam jumper. Next, I move on to the chronograph bridge, which will provide access to the chronograph runner. The runner has very small teeth, so I lift it out by one of its arms to eliminate the risk of damaging it. The minute recording jumper is removed. This is a very delicate spring. The blocking lever is now uninstalled. The coupling clutch is now removed. This is also containing the plate mounted to it with a pivot hole for the oscillating pinion. The clutch couples the oscillating pinion with the chronograph runner, which in turn drives the rest of the module when activated. The hammer is now removed for cleaning. The minute recording wheel is lifted out. The coupling clutch spring is carefully removed. The operating and flyback lever spring is removed. Note the shouldered screw for the flyback lever is reverse threaded. Anytime you see a screw with 3 lines in the head, you can assume that's going to be the case. The operating lever with the reverser mounted can now be uninstalled. The connecting plate is lifted off its post. The sliding gear spring is carefully maneuvered off the module. The sliding gear bridge can now be removed for cleaning. Onto the hour side, the hour recording jumper spring is removed. One thing to note here is the shim plate under this one is thicker than the one under the minute jumper spring. The hour recorder bridge is removed, which allows me to pull out the hour recording wheel. The hour recorder connecting wheel is removed. The hammer spring and hammer for the hour recorder are lifted away. The sliding gear assembly can now be uninstalled. Finally, the friction spring is removed. The various other screws are actually eccentric studs, and they will not be touched unless the chronograph needs fine-tuning. This is an automatic mainspring barrel designed to allow the spring with a bridle tail to slip along its walls after reaching a certain threshold. This threshold is important as it determines the amount of power reserve, among other things. If the spring slips prematurely, the watch may limp along with very little power and will stop running within hours after the automatic work stops winding it. But if it doesn't slip enough, rebanking may occur and the automatic work will be strained. Braking grease is used to create the right amount of friction, and there is very little evidence of grease on these walls. What I do see, however, is an excessive amount of scoring and wear to the walls of this barrel. The deeper scores likely absorbed whatever little grease was applied and then failed to provide ample contact surface area for the tail of the spring. Fortunately, this wear can be mostly eliminated with the help of the lathe. A graver mounted in a cross slide will be positioned so that it incrementally removes material from the wall of the barrel. The majority of the scoring is eliminated, creating a good contact patch for the mainspring tail to slide against with the braking grease. While I'm at it, the arbor has a little bit of wear as well, but that can simply be polished out. Much better. I'm giving extra attention to this barrel and arbor since I know this movement had power reserve issues. The holes in the barrel and lid are polished as well with the help of a piece of pegwood. For those wondering how I keep track of all the parts, I place each component in a numbered compartment built into the soldering mat I use as part of my work surface. Each part is placed with its respective screw and then photographed in its position. The parts are then methodically cleaned and returned to their positions with the help of the photos. There are probably a dozen other ways to do this, but my system hasn't failed me yet. As with any service, whether it be on a wristwatch or pocket watch, pegging the jewel holes is a great way to jumpstart the cleaning process as it loosens up the most stubborn debris on the most critical surfaces of the movement. Three dots of Kluber P125 automatic braking grease are applied to the wall of the barrel. I have a love-hate relationship with these mainspring winders I picked up from AliExpress. My biggest complaint being the arbor pin usually fails to hook the mainspring as it's just slightly too small. Instead, what I did was I drilled out the holes in the barrels so that I could accept the arbor size of my choosing. So in this case, I'm using the 7750 arbor to wind the spring into a 2892 barrel, which also happens to fit this caliber 12's mainspring barrel. A few drops of HB 1300 are placed on the bottom of the barrel before the spring is shot in from the winder. I like to place a bit more on top of the spring and also in the hole where the arbor will rotate. With the arbor inserted, the top of the arbor is then lubricated before the barrel lid is finally snapped into place. I was lucky enough to find a complete copy of the service guide online. I'll use it to help with the reassembly. There's just one catch. It's written in French. Je comprends un peu le français. Ce n'est pas un problème. In general, I use HB 1300 to lubricate the various posts in the keyless work. The minute wheel is installed first, followed by the two intermediate setting gears. The yoke and yoke spring are fitted to the movement. Another small upgrade I made recently was I replaced the Molykote DX grease with the blue Mobius 9504. It's used on all the high friction sliding surfaces. The setting lever is positioned next to the yoke. Later, it will be secured using the setting lever screw from the train side of the movement. I'm now reinstalling the setting lever spring. (9504) grease is used where the spring arm meets the setting lever mode selection post. The setting lever screw fastens the setting lever to the movement. Together with the lever, it not only secures the stem with the watch, but also facilitates mode selection through the action of the setting lever spring when the crown is pulled or pressed. The sliding clutch is lowered into place. In the meantime, I'll grease the flat faces of the winding pinion. Doing so helps mitigate wear when ratcheting against the clutch. The stem is also lightly greased with 9504. It is then inserted through the winding pinion and sliding clutch into the movement, and then secured by tightening the setting lever screw. Grease is applied to the area of the sliding clutch where the yoke sits, and I also place little grease where the yoke is actuated by the setting lever. The rotational points of the barrel arbor are lubricated with HB 1300. The barrel bridge can now be reinstalled. The screws for the click and intermediate ratchet wheel are used to secure the plate. The click is installed first, followed by its associated spring. The intermediate ratchet spring is fitted into its slot, and then the wheel can be installed as well. The lower part of the wheel has a shoulder for the spring to rest against. Don't know about you, but I enjoy some oil on my wigwag sandwich. Doing so enables smooth operation of the bidirectional automatic winding work. The stop click is carefully lowered into place. The tip of this click is lightly lubricated to mitigate wear as it ratchets against the teeth of the winding up wheel. The top of this pinion receives some lubrication as well before the sandwich is finally completed. Proceeding with the automatic winding train, the reduction gear and winding up wheel are both lowered into position. The stop click is carefully sprung against the teeth of the winding up wheel. The lower part of the stop click is a spring that must rest against this post here. The automatic winding output gear is reinstalled. This is ultimately what drives the ratchet wheel to wind the main spring. The coupling wheel receives a small amount of 1300 as lubrication before it's finally reinstalled into the movement. It isn't the easiest job carefully standing each of these 4 wheels up on their pivots. They're quite easy to knock out of place, so patience and breath control are the keys to success here. Finally, the upper automatic train bridge is fitted, carefully ensuring all the pivots are seated before tightening it down. I'm now oiling the pivots, and then I'll go ahead and reinstall the ratchet wheel. The oscillating axle receives a bit of 1300 before being fitted with the bridge and the weight. The assembly is pressed together and then lowered onto the movement. I'm ensuring that the winding is free and smooth in both directions. Before beginning with the main train of wheels, I'll first treat both the escape wheel and pallet jewels in epilam. Since epilam is quite volatile, it's important to dry the parts above room temperature to avoid condensation from forming on the metal as it evaporates. I'm only treating the stones because I want to avoid getting any on the fork slot. The impact of the balance impulse jewel against the slot will, over time, turn the epilam into an abrasive powder as it's worn off. A small amount of oil will lubricate where the faces of the pallet stones meet with the escape wheel teeth. Epilam helps to prevent this oil from migrating away from those surfaces, thereby extending the service interval of the movement. HB 1300 lightly lubricates the arbor of the second wheel before the cannon pinion is pressed on with the help of the staking set. The escape wheel and third wheel are lowered into place. The new fourth wheel has arrived. If you need a replacement, just remember the caliber 11 wheel has 66 teeth and the caliber 12 has 72 teeth. The difference is due to the redesign for the increased beat rate in the caliber 12. When attempting to position the second wheel, I realized that it needs to sit beneath the ratchet wheel, so that will need to be set aside for now. The train wheel bridge is now installed. I carefully ensure all upper pivots are seated before tightening it down. The ratchet wheel can now be fitted back on top of the mainspring arbor. The intermediate crown wheel can be installed followed by the crown wheel. The crown wheel has a core in the center, and note that the screw is reverse threaded. The third, fourth, and escape wheel pivots are lubricated with Mobius 9010, while HP 1300 is used on the second wheel pivot. The new drive wheel is slid on top of the extended pivot of the fourth wheel and is lightly pressed down with a stake. The pallet fork is being put back in place. Before applying lubrication to the stones, I plan to let the movement run for at least 15 minutes. The waiting period ensures that the epilom is worn off from the surfaces of the stones and the escape wheel teeth initially. With the pallet fork pivot seated, I can go ahead and tighten down the bridge. I'm giving the movement a couple of winds and then proceed to reinstall the balance. Hopefully it will just spring to life. Ah, beautiful. The end stone and hole jewel settings are removed so that lubrication can be applied. A droplet of Mobius 9010 is applied to the end stone before it is reunited with the hole jewel setting. The Inca block shock protection spring is then hinged back down and latched to secure the jewels over the balance pivot. And the same process is simply repeated for the jewels on the other side. The train pivots are lubricated with 9010. But it just dawned on me that the third wheel pivot is not accessible since I refitted this minute wheel cock. With the power exhausted, I could temporarily remove it so I can lubricate that pivot. The center wheel pivot receives a droplet of Mobius HP 1300. While I'm here, the lower pivots for the automatic work are lubricated as well. The pallet stones still need to be lubricated. It's been running a while and power is almost run down. When it's done, I'll remove the fork and lubricate the stones with Mobius 941. I probably could oil them through that little window, but I feel like I could be more precise when the fork is fully removed from the movement.
Tomorrow.
The power reserve issues have been solved. This is the movement's performance after almost a full day of running. Not shabby for a nearly 50-year-old watch. On to the calendar work. HP 1300 lubricates the posts for the center pinion, date drive wheel, and date jumper before each of them are installed. The hour wheel is lowered over the center pinion, ensuring that the two layers of teeth mesh with both the minute wheel and the date drive wheel. The hour wheel guard is slid into position. It will be secured using a screw through the date indicator guard. The date jumper spring is reinstalled to the lower side of that guard plate. And here's a little trick I learned from a real professional. Mobius 9504 grease is applied to the tip of this peg. Then the date indicator wheel can be cycled through it, effectively greasing the indices by just the right amount. With the date indicator in place, the guard plate can be fitted to the movement. The date indicator spring is then sprung against the back side of the date jumper through this little window. Now I just ensure the date changes over properly. The tech sheet references a dial washer, but this watch didn't have one. I assume it was lost at some point over the years, but I may have some spares in my box of goodies. The dial rest is now fitted back to the movement before the dial is then reinstalled. The two foot screws are retightened, securing the dial to the plate. For the chronograph module, assembly begins with the chronograph runner friction spring. The sliding gear assembly is reinstalled. HP 1300 lubricates the post for the hour hammer. The tip of the hammer that meets the heart also receives a small amount of 1300. The connecting wheel for the hour recorder, which has the reset heart, is lowered onto the plate. The hour recorder is now reinstalled. The hour recorder bridge is carefully situated, ensuring that the pivots of the two wheels are seated before it's tightened down. Due to clearance, I placed the thicker spacer for the hour recorder jumper prior to installing the plate. Now I can install the hour jumper itself. The sliding gear bridge is reinstalled. The spring for the sliding gear plate is manipulated around these posts. The connecting plate is lowered onto its post, which is first lightly oiled with HP 1300. I'm now reattaching the reverser to the tip of the mode operating lever. The operating lever is secured to the plate with two shouldered screws. These screws allow the lever to move when pressed using the pushers. As per the service guide recommendations, it is advised to apply a small amount of grease. In this case, I'm using Mobius 9504 on any surfaces that come into contact with the lever. The flyback lever is placed such that the lower post rests within the slot of the connecting plate, which was just oiled with a touch of 1300. The service guide calls for a small amount of oil here before reinstalling the screw, which is reverse threaded. The spring that serves both the operating and flyback levers is positioned between these posts. I'm now installing the spring that will be used for the coupling clutch. It will just rest between these posts for now, but it will need to be readjusted once the clutch is fitted. The minute recorder wheel is lowered into place. The thin spacer and the minute recorder jumper are now installed. These jumpers with their thin spring necks are extremely delicate. Deformed jumpers are a common issue in these vintage chronographs. I'm not sure if the chrono module was actually disassembled during this last service, but fortunately I didn't see anything that needed repair in this part of the movement. HP 1300 lubricates the rotational point of the hammer before it's reinstalled. The seat where the shouldered screw will sit is lightly oiled as well. It's important that the motion of the hammer, which directly resets that sweep center runner and minute recorder, is coordinated with the hour recorder hammer. A little 9504 grease is applied to the point on the hammer that meets with the hammer cam jumper. And now the hammer cam jumper is fitted. The coupling clutch is reinstalled. As mentioned earlier, this is the pivot where the oscillating pinion will be when this module is rejoined with the core movement. The coupling clutch spring can now be moved to the post underneath the clutch plate. The blocking lever serves as a brake for the runner wheel when the chronograph is stopped. I lightly grease the hammer pin where it makes contact with this lever. The tips of the hammer are lightly lubricated with Mobius HB 1300. I do the same for the horn of the friction spring and to the joint of the reverser. The chronograph runner is now inserted into the plate. The tech sheet provides some diagrams to help me orient the chronograph wheels relative to each other so they all operate in sync. Basically, I'm now just verifying alignment so that as the runner turns, the dart mounted under the wheel turns the gears in the sliding clutch once per minute, triggering a move by the minute recording wheel. When properly aligned, the movement of the hour recording wheel is in sync with the minute recording wheel so that it can make a small jump every 30 minutes. The chronograph bridge can finally be reinstalled, ensuring the starting positions of the darts isn't disturbed. The chronograph runner pivot is lubricated with Mobius 9010, but the other pivots are left dry according to the service manual. This is the oscillating pinion that transfers power from the fourth wheel mounted drive wheel to the chronograph module. It's always turning regardless of whether the chronograph is activated, so it will receive lubrication with Mobius 9010. Before installing the module, I lightly oil the arbor of the chronograph runner with 9010. The recorders do not receive such lubrication. Upon lowering the module onto the core of the movement, the most important task is to ensure the upper pivot for the oscillating pinion is properly seated in the coupling clutch. The 3 blued screws are returned to their respective positions to secure the chronograph module to the core movement. The upper pivot of the pinion receives a small amount of 9010 for lubrication. Activating the chronograph allows the coupling clutch to lean the oscillating pinion against the chronograph runner in the center. The first test ensures proper increment of the minute recorder. The second test ensures the 12-hour recorder, which is divided into 30-minute intervals, is also incremented, so I'm expecting the wheels on the right to tick over precisely at 30 minutes. Instead, the whole watch just stops. So, let's investigate. Here's the issue. Somehow the hour recorder jumper slipped underneath the hour recorder wheel in the process of mounting the module. Let's try that again. Much better. A second press on the operating lever stops the chronograph. The reset pusher sets all the chronograph hands back to their starting positions. The hour and minute hands are aligned at midnight, at the precise moment the date changes over. The changeover should happen within a couple minutes of midnight. As with the typical chronograph, the service guide recommends supporting the pivot point below the arbor as each hand is pressed on. The little pipes on chronograph hands are particularly tight, and that's because they need to resist the movement during the abrupt resetting action. Without support from underneath, the pressing action could slightly deform the plate and unseat the pivot, or worse, cause damage to the pivot or the jewel bearing. If you can even find one, there are bespoke movement holders that have these supports built into them if you don't feel comfortable balancing the movement on a stake. The reset test is performed from a difficult position, which is when the hands are pointed somewhat downward. Prior to recasing the movement, the pushes are cleaned and the gaskets are replaced. The case itself is fine, but the caseback has some gouges that I'll attempt to remove. By the 1960s, many brands were racing to create the world's first automatically winding chronograph. Of those brands, two major joint ventures were formed, one composed of Zenith and Movado. The other joint venture was composed of Heuer, Breitling, Hamilton Buren, and Dupois-Dupraz, and this group began developing their movement under the codename Project 99. Zenith was actually the first to announce and show working samples of such a chronograph in January 1969 in a small, low-key local press conference. The new watch was called the El Primero, or the First. However, in March of '69, the Project 99 group conducted a highly choreographed global announcement of their Chronomatic at press conferences in all the major cities, where they even handed out samples to audience members, essentially ignoring the Zenith announcement 2 months prior. Both groups went on to present their new watches at the Basel Watch Fair in April, but the Chronomatic group showed dozens more production samples than Zenith. By the summer, the Chronomatic, using the caliber 11 movement, had fully entered serial production for retail consumption, while it wasn't until later in the fall that the El Primero achieved that same milestone. Though I would be remiss if I didn't mention that all this while Seiko had been quietly developing and producing their 6139, though with much less noise and fanfare. It is often mentioned that while on March 3rd, the Project 99 group did unveil its automatic chronograph to the world, Heuer's head watchmaker would state that on that very same day, the service department received its very first automatic chronograph for repair. A gentleman had won the watch in a drawing at the press conference, but it didn't even make it to the end of the afternoon before malfunctioning. This is really no surprise and happens in any industry, as is the case with any greenfield design, especially one composed of compromises such as sticking the crown on the left. A brand new product rushed to market will just as quickly present its issues. But with great speed, the joint venture set out to make immediate improvements to the Caliber 11, eventually releasing the Caliber 11i that very year, and the higher beat Caliber 12, the one featured in this video, 2 years later. With the improvements, these movements went on to become workhorses of the 1970s and continue to function reliably with proper service 40 to 50 years later. Well, that's pretty much it. I hope you learned something from this video today, but if not, I hope you at least found it enjoyable. Thanks for fixing watches with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.